Order, order, and welcome to the Scottish Affairs Committee and the ongoing inquiry into the space sector in Scotland. Today we have some representatives of some of our foremost companies operating within Scotland. And I will now let them introduce themselves, maybe talk a little bit about the work that they do. And before we do that, of course, we visited both of your companies just a few weeks ago, and I think on behalf of the committee, just thank you for your time and your generosity. We learned a great deal from actually being there, speaking to you face to face and seeing around exactly what you do. So on that basis, we'll start with you, Ms. Condor.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Theresa Condor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and a co-founder of Spire Global. We're a data and analytics company that uses space technology to help government and business customers make the world a more sustainable, safe, and prosperous place. We operate the world's largest multi-purpose satellite constellation for the purposes of maritime, aviation, weather, and space services. We specifically have a focus on the collection of radio frequency signals, so what we tend to call listening satellites. We do all of that technology, the design, the manufacturing of that satellite constellation in Glasgow, in the Sky Park facility in the center of town. We initially came to the United Kingdom in 2015 and to Glasgow specifically to set up our satellite manufacturing facilities and space R&D center of excellence. So we've grown all those years. We now have over 160 employees in our facilities in Glasgow. We have built more than 170 satellites out of those facilities. I think together with us and AAC Clyde, we're really the whole reason that has made Scotland the main center of excellence for small satellite manufacturing across all of Europe.
Thank you. Mr. Gomes.
Hi there. I'm Luís Gomes. I'm the Group CEO for the AAC Clyde Space Group. I'm based in Glasgow. So we are an international group present in 5 different countries. We have 6 companies. And our job is to make space accessible to everyone. So if you want data, if you want to actually put your own satellites in orbit, we will be the people that can do that. So in Scotland, specifically, we build satellites, we build components for satellites, and we operate satellites that we then sell the data and services from those satellites to other companies around the world. And we are very much focused on markets that help our life down here on Earth. So we provide data to help people manage the oceans, to help manage crops in agriculture. So we are doing all of that out of Glasgow. We like to think that when we were founded in 2005, we were actually the start of the Scottish satellite industry. And I think that's fair to say. And we have come a long way since then. We currently have about 90 people employed in Glasgow out of the 180 that we have in the group across the world. And this year, for instance, we have built and launched 11 satellites, 10 of which made it to orbit. So we are growing not only our own constellation for our own services and data business, but we are also providing satellites to customers, to third-party customers around the world, all from Glasgow.
Thank you. Anderson.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Peter Anderson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for the AC Clyde Space Group. Probably just leave it there, right, because Luís covered it pretty well. Thank you.
I should also add that I know Mr. Anderson was present at a round table that we had with representatives from right across the space sector, which was really useful to one that we held in Glasgow. And we have further visits planned, hopefully, in the spring. So we're very much looking forward to that. But just to get started, just picking up a couple of things in your introductory remarks. It was you, Ms. Condor, who said that Scotland is a main centre of excellence when it comes to the space sector and what we're doing in terms of developing it and the jobs it's provided. And I've looked at a whole load of stuff that I've got here in front of me, talking about we could have a major part to play, we'll have an end-to-end facility, we lead in small satellite manufacturing, we've got hopefully have launch capability, space sports. Is all this deserved, this this accolades that we're getting about Scotland's space sector, the size and depth of it and its value to the economy, is it something that is tangible and is acknowledged and is felt, not just here in Scotland, but across the UK and perhaps in Europe?
I think for sure in Scotland that it is. I think it is given voice in the United Kingdom, certainly. There's always discussion about levelling up. There's still always talk about including Scotland. I think it's probably less well known in Europe as it could be, but it certainly is, because the UK does play a strong role in the European Space Agency. I think there's probably more recognition that could happen. More people from the space sector within the UK being willing to travel up to Glasgow and actually see, as you did, the facilities that exist, the type of technology and R&D that is being done, because I think sometimes when everyone is here in London, you're not here, people forget about you. They think you're at the same stage as you were the last time they saw you. And so I think that's actually the biggest challenge, is getting more people to travel up to Scotland and see what's actually being done there.
Thank you. Are we a centre of excellence, Mr. Gomes, when it comes to the space sector and what we have in Scotland?
Yeah, Scotland is probably the leader when it comes to CubeSats and small satellites, or nanosatellites in Europe. Produces more than anywhere else in Europe. But it's also about the quality of what is produced and the purpose. So we are not just doing experimental satellites anymore. We are doing actually operational satellites that are delivering a service, and they are delivering actually quality to a quality service to our customers. So yes, it is. I think it is fair to say that it is a centre of excellence, probably the centre of excellence for in Europe for
such
this
a
kind of satellites.
centre of excellence. Both of you had HQs in Scotland, which have now been relocated elsewhere. Why did you move on then, if we are such a centre of excellence?
I would say that when it comes to satellite building, our headquarters is still in Scotland. Our legal headquarters is in Sweden, because that's where the Swedish company that acquired the company was based. But our biggest facility is still Scotland, and most of our executive team is actually based in Glasgow.
Why did you choose Scotland and Spire for some of your development work?
Yeah, there were three main reasons when we were looking for a location to make our Center of Excellence for Satellite Manufacturing in 2015. The first one was really the partnership that we ended up seeing from Scottish Enterprise. That made a big difference when I was personally going around talking to a number of countries, and that was a very positive, supportive, I would say quick-moving interaction. The other thing that we cared about was there being an existing space ecosystem and supply chain, and it at the time is less developed than it is today, but it certainly existed. And the other thing when we're looking at a location is access to talent, because we are in an industry where you need engineers, data scientists, very high-tech capabilities, and I think, as everyone is aware, getting good talent, getting them to stay, getting them to be committed is something that every company is always thinking about. You have that in Scotland between really good universities, but also in particular kind of analogous industries, maybe oil and gas, where you can still find people who are skilled engineers, and then those can be transferred into the space sector. So those were the three things we looked at that we thought made Scotland an attractive place, and have been true.
You explained to us when we visited your facility, but why was there the merger between Clyde Space and AAC? Maybe you could answer that, Mr. Anderson. What was the reason behind that, basically?
AAC Microtech, which was the previous name of the public company in Sweden, had promised their shareholders, and nowadays our shareholders, that they would grow, and there was a few mechanisms, and one of those was through acquisition. Clyde Space at the same time, which was the name of the UK company, was on the precipice of taking another step and trying to become a bigger company. It had done a lot of investment and a lot of work and a lot of kind of partnerships in country to start it growing, and certainly we're looking to take some investment. So it ended up being a bit of a marriage of convenience, but certainly since then has ended up being a really great relationship, and the group has put a fair bit of investment. So it was a really good example of how inward investment can actually take what already exists in the country and actually add sort of weight to it and then take advantage of it. And I think, as Louise says, since then we've grown with the acquisition of 3 other companies and setting up one other to really kind of prepare ourselves again for what hopefully will be another big step to come.
What would be the motivation behind that big step? What do you see as the next big thing for both of your companies? As you know, like obviously we visited, we see what you do, and we realise it's a growing sector. What will it take in order to get to that next stage?
For us, well, what it will take is investment. I think fundamentally we find ourselves growing out of the traditional SME monkier and looking at this scale-up phase, and I think that's actually a really difficult phase to get past. It's risky. It's hard to necessarily always see the end goal, and I think for us we're really excited about what we've done. We've laid a lot of groundwork. We've taken some good support from the government, both in the UK more generally and Scotland, but really we're ready. And for us it's around our data services, and that's like the same as any industry. You know, like Dell or IBM back in the 90s, we could sell spacecraft, aka or servers in their case, but actually leasing that capacity and then generating recurring revenues from singular investments is clearly where we're going to end up being able to grow.
And for Spire?
Yeah, I think, as you may be aware, in 2021 we went public on the New York Stock Exchange. We're now at over 100 million in annual recurring revenue, and so I think you pass that mark, it puts you in a different stage of company where we start looking at the growth opportunities, and I think we start being expected to be seen not as an SME but as a really key player in the sector overall. So I think that's what we're looking for, and I think we are that in Scotland, and I think in the broader UK we're looking to get that recognition for the role that we play in this particular sector in the UK and of course in other places where we're located as well.
Thank you. And Kisa.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for joining us today. Ms Condor, you've spoken about what pulled you that space business to Scotland, but some of the evidence that we've received as a committee says that the UK space ecosystem favours businesses in the south of England. Have Spire experienced disadvantages as a result of being based in Scotland?
I think to some extent that's probably true. I mean, you can never say one way or the other how things are done. UK Space Agency is definitely the gatekeeper to working with the European Space Agency. Any company in the UK trying to work with ESA has to go through UKSA and get their approval first. And ESA needs to be a partner if you want to work with institutional customers, which we do. And so my biggest concern with UKSA always is to make sure that we can do this in a timely way, quickly, to the relevant degree, that is not just kind of tiny little competitive SME-based projects that never go towards real commercialization or operationalization, because that's what we're really focused is on, not doing one-off R&D projects, but building technologies, working with customers that turn into real recurring revenue. And so I think sometimes when it's very difficult for people down here in the South to visit what we do in Glasgow, to pay attention to how we've grown, to pay attention to our operational capabilities, sometimes it's just as out of sight, out of mind, and you need to try and make that much more effort to always be in front of people and remind them of what the opportunities are.
Mr Gomes, what challenges have AAC Clyde Space experienced being based in Scotland? Similar?
I think similar. I think there is we are far away, and sometimes that we can get forgotten. Recently I was in a function here in London, and several people that hadn't seen me in a while because of the pandemic said, "Oh, I'd forgotten you guys were up there." So you do get that. There is also there is a lot of activity down in the south of England relating to space, and in many cases we notice that a lot of the decisions are taken, a lot of the information flows between informal methods, so it's people meeting other people, people seeing each other, And we are sometimes surprised by some activities, some initiatives that are published, and we say, "Oh, didn't we know about these?" And people go, like, "Oh, didn't you know about these? This was happening. It had been discussed. In the different forums down here in the south." I used to be based in a company here, and I know how that worked. That was much easier to do.
What can you do to tackle that, or what can be done at a governmental level?
I think making sure that for instance, the space agency does have strong representation up north. That those activities are actually. There is that opportunity to actually talk to representatives of the space agency that are close to the decision process of the agency. Make sure that probably I don't like to use the word forcing, but forcing people to actually be in Glasgow, for instance, more regularly, visit us, visit the companies, interact with us. There are some people in the agency, in the MOD, that actually try to do that. Others probably not so much. So having that, but I think mostly we need a constant presence in Glasgow, or in Scotland in general. I think strong presence. It can't be just representation. It has to be someone that actually has the power to take decisions. And maybe some part of the agency needs to be based there.
And expanding on that, Mr. Anderson, do you feel as a business that you have enough opportunities to contribute to discussions around space strategy, both at Scottish and UK level?
I suppose that's a slightly difficult one to answer, in the sense that I think as a company we've put a lot of effort into doing just that. So I would say on a kind of AEC Clyde Space level, we've worked really hard. We've employed people specifically with that task. And we're here today, and certainly I was actually thinking this morning, I've been down in London quite a number of times this year, attending various roundtables and workshops and making sure that we're heard. We were in Belfast last week for the UK Space Conferences, as we mentioned, and it's certainly a big part of that was just to show face and actually just tell people what we're doing, why we're doing it, and listen. We even had our chairman fly in and be present at that as well, because it's so important to kind of have the right people in the room. So, we've worked really hard, but I say that is quite a barrier for the majority of companies in Scotland who are not.
Sounds like you're making roadways to have those conversations, but they're not necessarily open to you as a business.
I think they're open to us if we make the effort. So we put a lot of effort in it. So I probably, when I was speaking before, I'm generalizing for the industry in Scotland. We have over the years, luckily, and I suspect Spire also, have built those bridges. Yeah. We have, for instance, we have a team down here in London that is based here. So for us, is probably we have gone past that barrier. But I think for smaller companies in Scotland, those that haven't been able yet to do that, they probably will struggle more, and requires quite a lot of effort and investment.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think you have to be down here very, very regularly. And you need to make sure that you end up being part of the informal discussions, as Luis mentioned. The informal discussions are actually very important in how things still seem to get done.
And so, but at a UK level, we've got the national space strategy, and at a Scottish level, we've got a strategy for space in Scotland. What do you think are the right priorities from both of these strategies, Ms. Condor?
So I'm very happy that UK came out with the space strategy. Everyone was waiting for it for a long time, and also that Scotland is taking this seriously and not just waiting for what happens in the UK. There's a broad list of priorities around those strategies, and to some extent, it's not everything you can think of, but there's a very big list. And so to me, it comes down to what are the actions that are actually going to be taken based on that policy, and what are the budgets behind it. Because for too many times, you'll have the space policy, and then you'll have another policy document for like each kind of category or priority underneath that original policy. And then you feel like you have a bit of everyone just waiting till someone decides what are the actions we're going to take, what are the programs that we're going to push. And so to me, that the actions are going to be way more important. But I think it is around, Earth observation is something very relevant. Anything around climate, dual use capabilities, and I think what is really important is starting to focus on data and data capabilities coming from commercial customers. So not just small satellite manufacturing for the sake of it, but it's actually what are the data sets that are collected from that and how are they used. And one of the areas under Earth observation that I think has to have a bigger focus is when it comes to meteorology and that connection between meteorology and space, which right now in the UK is actually very decoupled, and I think is losing an opportunity for both of those sectors.
Mr. Gomes, what would you say are the right priorities from both of these strategies?
I tend to agree that Earth observation is probably the one item that in the strategy that I think we should really be pursuing, not only in terms of meteorology but also everything to do with atmospheric physics, the gas detection on the atmosphere, and also not forgetting an area that we are working now quite actively, that is agriculture and forestry. We believe there is quite a lot of potential worldwide and globally to support food production and monitor forests that are things that are critical for our future. But even in Scotland and the UK, there is quite a big sector around these areas that we can support, and we can support from the UK. And the UK also has quite a lot of interest in terms of international aid, and this is a way of actually using British industry to provide that support internationally, that global support. So I think those areas are quite key. Not to forget many other areas that are mentioned in the space strategy. What I think is important is to have directed programs around that space strategy. We see that in many other countries right now. There are very big efforts being put into specific items in their national strategies, and I believe that's something that the UK has in general, and Scotland in particular, has to progress. If you look in some European countries, there is a lot of money being invested in specific aspects of their strategy, and so I think that is something. To pursue a strategy, you have to actually fund it.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, what do you think should be the priorities for the Scottish space sector over the next decade?
I think fundamentally overall growth should be the number one, and how that's then funded and supported. I think Scotland faces quite a few challenges with respect to skills, with respect to logistics, etc. And while I think that some very specific programs would be beneficial to that, I think overall supporting the industry to grow and ensuring that we can actually then generate the exports and the revenues to allow us to support ourselves, I think is actually very important. And really for then the next 15, 20 years after that, it's a very different landscape. So I think that should be the priority. I think UK-wide, there's obviously some other bits that I suppose none of us tend to directly impact. So there's obviously some strategy around sovereign capability and some other sort of aspects, certainly post-Brexit, which I think are important, but don't really fall under our remit, so I'll not talk too much more about those. But yeah, I think certainly otherwise what the guys have said here.
You talk about skills and logistics. What specific challenges are you seeing there?
In terms of skills, I think it's very specifically is around that sort of medium gap. So a 5 to 10-ish year skill base is very difficult to hire in, and it's also very difficult to retain. That much is true. There's some competition in country, you know, and within the industry, but also within parallel industries as well. But what it really comes down to is being successful enough as an industry to continue to support that.
What sectors are you fighting against?
It's not so much fighting, so to speak, but there's obviously a lot of crossover happens between maybe the renewables, oil and gas, some other high-tech sectors. Software can be with the finance sector as well. So we do find. What can be
done then to attract more people to space? Not literally. Not literally.
Getting into my campaign. No, it's. I think sometimes space is. We can be a bit of our own worst enemy. We're a bit too on the whole. Isn't space class? And whoever searches for space on Indeed.com, right? So we need to make space more accessible. People need to understand that their skills are transferable. One thing we've been working on, and it's really a point-to-point case, and it isn't going to solve anyone's problems overnight, is with one of the colleges up in Scotland, and with Space Scotland, we've supported the development of one of these types of crossover courses, with the whole intention being that it's an independent third party, so we're not delivering the course, we basically set requirements and help to develop it. And the idea being then, the burden's not on us to sort of bring people across, and they could go there first. I almost liken it to the RGIT within the oil and gas industry, whereby you kind of have an independent goes and teaches you all the safety stuff and to make sure that you know what you're doing. That burden's not on the company directly to be able to understand how to do that, and they all pay the sort of fee towards it. I think Space could certainly benefit from that type of thing.
Ms. Condor, what would you like to see happen over the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had really great success in hiring good talent since we've been there, but we're in a situation even around the world where talent is difficult, and retaining people and finding the best people is difficult. There has been some amount of good employees just kind of making the rounds between companies in Scotland a little bit, which I think is not what any of us necessarily want to see happen. That just holds everyone back. It's easier to hire junior people than people who have that more experience level. So it's, and the most valuable people to bring in are ones that do have experience in another company doing something, kind of similar, that can come in and hit the ground running, or that can turn and be managers of more junior people. We have been involved in some of those kind of trainee programs where you'll have students who are about to graduate come in and do a training program and then end up joining the company, and we've had success with those as well. Not something that we've been able to do at scale. And I think the other problem is that when you have people just running so fast and really trying to grow the company, you run out of time to really do a proper type of training and bringing in people coming right out of university as you would generally want to. So there could be something there that could be facilitated that might support it. The biggest question there is related to everyone's bandwidth to actually train new people coming in. When you're a smaller company, you don't always have time to do that.
Thank you, panel, and thank you, Chair.
I'm just wondering, we've received quite a lot of evidence on the national UK strategy particularly, and quite a lot of it says that it lacks details about how its aim will achieve, and I think Mr Anderson recalled there was quite a few contributions about this at a round table where, again, people were asking how its ambitions would be achieved. And we've seen a lot of strategies in this committee over the course of the past few years, and they almost seem to be, like there's a familiar pattern, shall we say, in use of language, like the unlocking growth, the collaborating internationally, making the UK a technology superpower, developing resilience. I mean, all these things could apply to any sector. What makes us distinct to space? Is there anything that, like when I look at it, I'm trying to find, other than the references to some of the work that's ongoing, like where is that ambition? How do we get from where you are just now to being a leader when it comes to the world? Ms. Condor, I see you.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that the UK can do that is related to defense and security, and that is related to weather and climate, and two areas where the UK can play a very strong role, and where space also plays a very specific role. And I think really what the UK needs to do is start looking much more aggressively at the role of government as a customer, rather than government as a grant giver.
Mm-hmm. We'll come on to that. We've got a couple of questions on that very issue, so we will go in detail. But I'm just wondering, do we want to see more space in a space strategy, Mr. Gomes?
I think that is important, and I think it is also probably focusing the ambition. So there are certain areas that probably offer better growth, quicker growth, and that are more would offer more uniqueness to what the UK is doing. And I think, as all strategies, they try to actually cater to a variety of interests. And so there is always the danger that you end up spreading your strategy over many
interchangeable strategy.
Interchangeable strategy, yes. So I think sometimes focusing in a few activities, focusing on a few strategic lines is probably important, because that will actually focus everyone. And even if some companies have to actually change their focus, that might be in the long run, that might be actually an important step.
Just try to get how you really felt about it, but I think we've got some of that there, but thanks. And I know Mr. Duguid's got some questions about scaling up and some of the challenges around that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Excuse the frog in my throat. I'm going to come on to the scaling up challenges, but just quickly leading on from the policy issues that we've just been talking about, I was just wondering if either of you, I'll ask all three of you, would have any examples of any particular conflict or barriers that exist because we've got a UK strategy and a Scotland strategy. Scotland being a constituent part of the United Kingdom, does the space industry feel like it's part of the larger whole, or is there any examples of where it feels like it's too distinct from each other and creates this gap between them?
I'll start. From our perspective, we have worked very well with both Scottish and UK national policies and agencies that help us on building our business. So we have actually had a very good relationship. We have been, I would say, successful with both governments, let's say, in that sense. So we have not faced that. I suspect that occasionally that might be a problem in certain parts of the strategy. It also comes to the fact that we are very adaptable, so because we do different types of business, we can actually adapt to the different, let's call it flavors of the strategy. But I suspect that there might be on some occasions some conflict or some difficulty for particularly smaller companies to adapt if they might have to choose one or the other.
To maybe ask it in a slightly different way to maybe help Ms. Condor, for example, go next. Would you have any suggestions for how the two governments and the two policies could work better together?
Yeah,
or more collaboratively.
That's tricky, because my first reaction to your initial question was that I'm not aware of conflicts per se, but probably more just confusion of, you know, okay, there's a UK one and there's a Scottish one, and which one is the real one, or which one is overriding the other one or not. I think it's great that Scotland is taking this sector seriously, and that's why we're in Glasgow and why we continue to be happy there. And again, for me, having a policy comes down to what do you do with it, and what actual programs and money do you put against it to drive an agenda. And so, to me, that would be where Scotland and Scottish, you know, space policy can help the UK actually not just do another policy and have more meetings, but actually help focus in on the agenda as it supports companies in Scotland in particular.
Mr. Anderson, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think it really does just come down to budgets, because that's really what, you know, depending on the strategy, who's paying for it. And that's what really kind of matters ultimately, because otherwise they're just very nicely put together documents and we can read them and then put them to the side and get on with the day jobs. So I think it is important to understand, and then I suppose that might be the real question. Then if you have a Scottish one and a UK one, do they differ in terms of funding? Who might get behind the Scottish strategy over the UK strategy? And I might even put it back the other direction and saying, like, how to fund, like, people who own funds and owns budgets, which one do they want to get behind? You know, which one makes sense? I'll give you one example though, just to kind of jump to one of your first questions where you asked whether you see conflict or otherwise. I've seen one good example where it's worked quite well. Mm-hmm. Scotland being a bit smaller can be a bit more agile, right, on occasion in terms of the way the industry works. And there was a need within the UK space, this was, I believe, and there was a need to look at sustainability agenda and looking at how space should be used and could be used and certainly should be used responsibly. And actually Scotland had already done quite a bit of work on this, and they had set up a committee and had outputted a policy, and it was actually someone put their hand up in another meeting and said, we actually have this, don't do it again. And as I understand it, it was actually welcomed, and they said, great, we'll take that over actually, and we'll review that, because I thought that was quite impressive actually, that it wasn't a case of like, very good, put that to one side and we'll do this again. So I thought in that particular instance it was a good example of how that can work, and maybe that's just that collaborative nature that we need to strive for a bit more in regards to how that works.
Okay, thanks. And on the, I mean, you've all mentioned funding there and financial support, and we have heard that there is a challenge on scaling up. So helping startups is something that governments like to do, and it's all very exciting and interesting. But how, when those companies succeed and then want to get bigger, what kind of obstacles are in place to, or in the way of helping that, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, as
You're
you say,
nodding your head the most vigorously.
Yeah. I really want to answer this one. No, it's. I think there is really good support, and like anything, I'm sure it could always be better. And I suppose in many ways it could never stop, and always has to be built on for smaller businesses. And to start a business, and Scotland is actually a particularly good place to start a business. There's good support to do that, and that comes, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit about it afterwards from the gents there in a Scottish enterprise, and it's really good, and Spire's a great example of that. That type of funding, though, is to do very specific bits of technology development, very specific sort of widgets. When you get to a certain size, and they're very rarely, if ever, 100% funded, when you get to a certain size, your investors have no appetite to fund another bit. And really what they're expecting at that stage, you should be able to do that yourself. And I think that's fair. You should spot the market opportunity, invest in it, access it. It's when you're starting to take a big scale jump, and actually almost what you're presenting, dare I say, it could be seen as slightly boring in a way. We're looking to scale now. You know, we need the support to take the big step here and actually put a system up to start delivering a service level. So away from technology demonstration to service level work. And I think that funding is much more difficult to come by in the UK. Certainly where we see, and you said government as a customer, we'll come back to that, but that's where we really do see being the real opportunity for that.
Despite the fact that, for example, and I've seen this in other industries, where a relatively successful larger company could create tens, if not hundreds of jobs with some support, the excitement or the sexiness, if you like, is more focused on the startups, and which might be only a few dozen jobs, but in terms of looking at it from a job creation point of view, it's not necessarily looked at that way. Or Mr. Gomes?
I think the danger of just looking at the job creation is that many times it's easy to actually put a case that says I'm going to hire 500 people. It's actually the sustainability of that. So when you are actually trying to put across a business case that shows, okay, in 10 years' time, we are going to be 10 times as big in terms of revenue, in terms of jobs, in terms of everything. That sometimes is a long time. And I noticed that governments usually like the much more shorter term promise of a lot of jobs. But that doesn't necessarily create a sustainable business or a sustainable sector. It might create great headlines, but it doesn't actually deliver that kind of long-term growth. And picking up on something that Peter was starting to say, there is also on medium-sized companies, when you actually want to grow very much, the funding mechanisms that are usually available are not really easy to explain to investors. So when we are scaling, for instance, and we are offered 50% co-funding on big projects, that starts to become quite difficult for our investors to understand that. And so we would prefer actually other mechanisms that actually put probably more onus on us to actually find funding, but they are more deterministic for our investors, because we are, I can tell you, as being a company that is now in that phase, we are going from a company that is now on EBITDA positive territory, but growing quite quickly. But we are in that mid-sized territory. It's actually quite difficult to find the funding, even being a listed company. So actually, I don't think that the small company funding mechanisms are appropriate for these scaling up. And then I also think, as I said, that just looking at number of jobs that are created is a dangerous metric, because does not create a long-term sustainable sector. I don't think that is...
We often hear from, again, across a number of industries, but particularly in the renewable energy sector, 10,000 jobs here, 20,000 jobs there. And I often wonder where these people are going to come from. Ms. Gomes, sorry, Condor, do you have anything to add to that in particular? Is there anything that you would suggest that either the UK government or the Scottish government, or both of them working together, could be doing to help address some of these barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff at the very early stage where you might get financial support for number of people hired, for example, is good when you're a very young company and you're starting out. When you have grant-based R&D competitions, those can also be really relevant to get a specific type of technology going, and maybe you would start doing the R&D a little bit sooner than you otherwise would have because you can win a particular grant. But grants are not revenue, and commercial companies are always worried about their revenue and then about their profitability. And so what you end up happening, I think, across the UK, and you see it across Europe as well, is you have a bunch of SMEs that will remain SMEs forever, and they basically go from one grant-funded R&D project to the next, and they just, that's all they do. They don't actually do kind of focused work towards an operational business plan. Their business plan is just to keep winning these kind of smaller projects that are doing, interesting projects, very relevant R&D work, but it doesn't necessarily turn into something that is actually used, that is in a state of readiness for a customer to take and get value out of. And so I think some of that is good and probably necessary, but if you do too much of it, you just create this kind of dependency of companies that never actually grow towards an operational service. And that's where customer contracts matter so much. And I mean, maybe you'll come to the question later, but there is no large space company that does not have a significant portion of their revenue coming from government customers, because that is in space where a lot of the money and the funding and the appetite for technology comes from. And you have absolutely commercial, and we have a lot of commercial in my company, but you really, government is a key customer in space.
So whether it's the UK government strategy or the Scottish government strategy, I'm guessing from your earlier answers we're not doing everything we can, but what could be done better to make sure that we're making that jump from just grant funding R&D but towards actually creating more customer-based, whether it's private customers or the government as a customer, to deliver more sustainable growth and more useful growth, if you like, to the overall economy?
Yeah, so if I'm allowed, I would say that using procurement mechanisms to drive focused R&D is one way to do it. So you could have, Scotland or UK saying, I have particular technologies or capabilities that we believe is important, and where we also want to have, national technology capability. And so instead of doing a competition and giving out some grant funding, and then the next round you do a completely different topic, you say, okay, I want to develop this technology, and that's going to take 3 phases of work until something is operationally ready. And so I'm going to give, phased work to several companies so that they can all develop this capability. They can compete against each other. They can try, slightly different approaches to the technology. And it's R&D, and I get that it's R&D, but it's a procurement contract. So they can go and take it as revenue. Government can follow the progress of it. They can down select over phases, and at the end there will be an actual operational service that whatever those successful companies can go and sell into the market, even if Scotland is not going to be a operational customer of that capability. And that's something that is done in the United States. And it's that kind of, directed R&D using procurement. And I think it's quite successful. And this is why you see so many companies going to the United States and desperately trying to set up a U.S. location so that they can take advantage of those opportunities.
That's interesting. Mr. Gomes or Mr. Anderson, anything to add to that?
I'll just add that we agree. Give us contracts, don't give us grants. That's what I would say. And there are two types of contracts. There are the R&D ones that are very successful in the US, that are very much, to some extent, speculative. Is government saying we might be interested in these, so we'll give you a contract to develop this technology. Might actually succeed or not. And then there are the other ones that are about we need this service, we need these maritime surveillance, for instance, and give it and compete it. There are enough companies of us in Scotland that actually a good competition is possible, and that would be, to me, the best way of doing this. And the metric then is: are we providing that service, and are we developing the sector? But this is something that is very successful, as Theresa says, in the US. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big. I don't think, for instance, some countries just give money to companies to put satellites in orbit. I don't think that is a particularly good use of money. But contracts for the services and for the data, I think it is a very good contract. And we have had some success recently on demonstration services that we are developing in Scotland from a few different agencies. And hopefully those will take us to operational services, but it's still very much in the start. So, and to justify investment, for instance, investors need to see that customer appearing. And there is also an interesting factor in there, is that if other countries, if other governments see your national government being a customer, they will be much more inclined to then actually also buy the service, buy the data, because they will see that, okay, if they are trusted by their government, then this is a good company. I can.
If it's good enough for them, then it must be good enough for us.
Mm-hmm. And US-based companies, really succeed.
Finally, Mr. Anderson, anything to add to any of that?
I honestly don't think I have much to add to that. No.
That's all I wanted to ask for the moment. Thank you.
Bryan.
Thanks, Chair. I think Reddy covered some of what I was going to ask, but obviously a big theme that was coming out there from each of you is this about governments, UK government, Scottish government being customers, and that allows you to grow and gives you reputational advantages as well. So I suppose we'll start with you, Ms. Condor, because you spoke about earlier about working aggressively with government in terms of getting procurement or getting contracts from governments. So what kind of services can you offer? Is there services you're providing at the moment to the UK or Scottish governments, and what's the barriers at the moment to actually, being able to grow more?
Yeah. So one example of data services that we're providing right now is atmospheric weather data. So temperature, pressure, type of measurements we collect from our satellite constellation. That data is today used by Met Office, so every time you check the weather, you're taking advantage of some of the data from our satellites built in Scotland that get incorporated into the weather forecast by Met Office. However, Met Office cannot actually work with us directly. What has to happen is that I do a contract with EUMETSAT, which is this European member body for meteorology and satellites. Met Office is a member of that, and Met Office has to live with whatever EUMETSAT decides. So Met Office right now gets to use my data that I sell to EUMETSAT. EUMETSAT then gives to Met Office, and they get maybe a tenth or less of the actual data that I collect. And they have to wait until EUMETSAT goes through their whole process to start using all the other types of meteorological and climate data sets that I also am collecting, that we are collecting from our satellite constellation.
Why can't the Met Office procure direct? Why does it have to be that roundabout way?
Because the way it's always been is that weather data is done by governments, and it's very recent. We are actually the first commercial company that was providing satellite weather data as a commercial entity. And so Met Office never had a budget that allowed them to procure satellite data. All their satellite space-related budget went to EUMETSAT. And so the pathways just don't exist. And I think this is a huge gap right now that I'm telling everybody to pay attention to, because you have one of the biggest space data users ever is Met Office. And they have to go to Europe to get data sets from satellites, and they can't actually work directly with space companies in the UK. And so the more that you can combine what's happening with meteorology and what's happening with the space sector overall in the UK, I think it's a win-win.
And so you're saying kind of it was always thus, and that's why they have to do this. So what level of decision making, or who controls the purse strings that can actually potentially make these changes that you're asking for?
It would have to be DCIT. DCIT.
Right.
Making the capability, putting a specific line item in for Met Office to do some of their own procurement of satellite data sets, still contributing to EUMETSAT, but also doing something else, which I think also contributes to greater UK leadership and stature overall. It's basically what US Congress had to do for NOAA to go and procure commercial data sets. They had to give a specific directive to go procure commercial data sets and test it out and see if they could get good quality, good value. And that's what moved it forward in the United States. And EUMETSAT is doing that as well, just at a very small degree and very slowly. And not just my data sets, but other commercial data sets in the UK. And UK has and Scotland, a great competence in meteorological payload development as well as knowing what to do with the data sets and the data analysis. To me, this is like the first easy, super concrete thing that could help the UK, could help commercial companies, could help research entities that also want to access the data sets.
Well, is there anything else in terms of services that you think either Scottish or UK government should be looking at procuring, and what would be the advantages to the taxpayer in doing that? Because obviously, commercially you want a return, but the taxpayer's effectively got to get a return in the government procurement, or else it's a state aid effectively.
Yeah, that's why the meteorology one makes a lot of sense, because every single person checks the weather and wants a more accurate weather forecast. But I think on climate data sets that are collected by commercial companies matter a lot. I think if you want to talk about defense and security data sets that matter quite a lot, that can be procured. This could be around kind of spectrum monitoring, GNSS jamming, geolocation, things like that. That is, it's definitely on the defense and security side. Some other things around maritime domain awareness, dark vessel detection, things like that are operationally available from commercial satellite companies, and that's very relevant for the military, but it's very relevant to illegal fishing, to understanding safety and securities of waters around the borders, to even understanding sanctions compliance, supply chain, all of that. So there is a lot of relevance, whether that's Scottish government as customer, I don't know. Many of these things are probably more on the UK side, unless I misunderstand.
Yeah. Do you want?
Yeah, I was going to come to yourself, Mr. Anderson, because it came out loud and clear at our visit to your premises as well, that you spoke very much about government procurement and there should be more. So, and in your written submission, you also spoke about company spoke about barriers to MOD contracts as well. So can you maybe give some examples of services you think either Scottish or UK government should be providing, and also the barriers you've encountered about MOD work?
Yeah, okay. I think there's a lot of government agencies probably don't even realise. So I think some are pretty mature with space data, and I think the Met Office is a really good example of that. I think there's a lot of agencies that don't know that they could be using space data, and it could actually, and you talked about the return on investment for the taxpayer, it isn't necessarily always about...
Does come in, is that civil servant level or ministerial level, or a bit of both as well?
Oh yeah, a bit of both, and I think if anything it's a bit of an educational thing as well, people understanding, and I think actually the maritime domain awareness piece is a really interesting thing where you might have a lot of active surveillance and people in boats and coastal stations that could be replaced or augmented with space data and really improve that there. I think the UK is a really unique place in a sense, and we talked about that when you visited. It's quite a good sandbox in terms of forests and urban areas and maritime and oil and gas and renewables. There's a lot of areas where we could be providing a lot of advantage. We've done work with renewable sectors to demonstrate how space data, and it's not exclusively space data, right? That's what's important here as well. It's included with other data sets, which are sometimes terrestrially driven, to then augment and provide this much better service. So for us, I think one of the other things the government could do is to help bring those agencies through and to actually get them a chance to understand what people can do and see whether or not space data could be an advantage to them. I don't know if you want to add to that before we talk about the MOD.
I think the fundamental issue in many of these points is that traditionally governments are much more geared towards giving grants for technology, and occasionally to procure, like in the case of the weather, to procure their own satellites, either through international organizations or directly. So the concept of actually buying data and services from space assets is not always traditional, is not always understood. And as I say, we are doing quite a lot of work with different agencies now in terms of developing products, effectively things that agencies can use. For instance, we are doing a lot of work on renewables and on forestry to see how we can actually create a product that government agencies can actually go and say, we want that. But it's an education. It's something that we have to actually educate those agencies, because we ourselves have to demonstrate what can be achieved. And as I say, the procurement mechanisms are not really there right now, and that is something we have to address if we want to grow this sector.
Yeah, it's space has matured a lot in the last 15 years, so it's not like this used to be the case and then somehow it's been forgotten about and we're trying to bring it back to the forefront again. 15 years ago these services were not so available, and I think as the industry has quite accelerated in the last probably 5 to 10 years and companies have started and become big in that time, I think really it's just time for government to kind of update the way they look at space. And exactly that, it's not just about technology development, and it's not even just about getting to the moon or to Mars, and all that stuff's very important, but it's also about the commercial side of things. Space has become much more commercially focused than it ever has been, and it actually can provide value, and that sort of investment can actually deliver that benefit, as you say.
You want to elaborate on MOD?
Yep, we'll get onto that now. So a really interesting customer who by all reports and reports directly to ourselves, really want to access. So one of the things about small businesses, of which Scotland has many, is that they're very innovative and we can move quickly, relatively speaking, and we innovate and we push the boundaries a lot. That's very exciting for defence agencies. It's very exciting for even agencies like ESA, and that's why they quite often want to support small businesses, because they get access to these great ideas, really kind of grassroots, ground sourcing it. The issue with the MOD is a real barrier in terms of even speaking to them. It's quite expensive to bring yourself to the table. So while they can visit us and they can be very excited and invite us to come, and that's like top brass talking to us, when we kind of engage with the machine, so to speak, it closes down pretty firmly at that point. And we've been asked to put certain insurances in place to have conversations, which are just too expensive on the off chance we might be able to do some work. It's a smaller business, that's very, very difficult for us. And yeah, there's a little bit what we talked about earlier, being present and being at certain things and having the kind of off-hand conversations. That's also very important. But really, the first one is a real barrier for us.
It's a very large machine when it comes to the MOD. So talking to everyone is difficult and expensive, and also the kind of products that they are used to are usually supplied by very large companies, and so it's difficult to actually change the mentality. They are used to go and buy a big satellite that does a lot of things. It's difficult to change that mentality, and if you are far away, it's even more difficult.
And you say that in one level there's some good engagement, but then that engagement's not translating obviously into changing of procurement and systems.
There's definitely a lag. And maybe if there was any opportunity to do something sort of actively, that would be a good place to try and bring the rest up.
Right, okay. Just ask Ms. Condor, how does that compare to how the US government procures?
Yeah, it is very difficult working, and selling to the US government as well, and certainly on the military side as well. So I think that's the case anywhere you go. Everyone has that complaint, especially when you're a small company, of like, how do I interact? And you talk to senior people and they're very excited and interested. And then figuring out how to translate that into actual, procurement and contractual frameworks is still difficult. In the United States, I think there has been a greater openness to this procurement of data services. So that's on the civil side. You see with NOAA procurement of weather data services. You see on the intel side the procurement of optical imaging services, which or SAR, for example, which has really helped all the companies that provide those type of data sets. You're starting to see now the procurement of specifically of data sets related to RFGL, radio frequency geolocation capabilities. So there are some initiatives that have been created around specific data sets with really decent sized budgets attached to it. And then those allow smaller companies or newer companies that have that data set uniquely to get involved and start building the track record. On the other side of things, the U.S. has worked to put together some contractual frameworks that can be simplified, get done very quickly, and are not as onerous as some of the typical ones. So they've really tried to find ways that they can work with smaller and new companies. It doesn't mean that it's perfect by any means, but I think it for sure could be relevant for the defense side here to look at that. And the other thing, like in the US, I think there's less concern maybe for dual use, as everyone talks about here, given that budgets are much smaller. And so there is a lot of discussion around what are technologies that can be used for certain civil purposes that are important, but that can at the same time be used for defense purposes. And so there's kind of, greater impact per budget that could be had if you look at those. And I know there's a lot of discussion about MOD and Space Command coordinating with DCIT, but it doesn't seem to happen in practice. Yeah.
Just one more on that, and Chair. Just in wider government procurement, obviously you feel a lot more can be done. In a previous session, Professor Ian Woodhouse gave an example that the UK government actually did a direct award of £20 million to an Italian company, so services weren't offered in the UK. I'm not sure any is aware of that, and
I don't know which one.
No.
I know of a recent one for a Canadian company, but not for.
Yeah, that's the one I'm aware of.
I'm aware of one for a Canadian company, and I suspect there are on occasions the needs to actually procure outside the UK, the same way that other companies will procure from, or other countries will procure from UK companies. So I think there is an international market in data and services, and that will continue to happen. My hope is that if there is that capability in the UK, then procurement will be prioritized for UK companies. But there is an international market, and we sell from some satellites in here data that will then be used in other countries for governments. So that also happens. So I think that will always happen. But if we can develop those capabilities in the UK, then we could procure. The government could procure from here.
Thank you. First.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. Just kind of following on from that last subject, is it fair to say that space and defence are very closely linked, the sectors? Everyone's nodding there. There's been a suggestion that the Scottish Government are very keen to promote space, but they have more concerns around the defence angle, and this is certainly something that will come up with the next panel. Do you believe, or have you seen any missed opportunities where the Scottish Government could do more to promote Scotland and the space sector, but because it's linked too closely with the defence sector, they don't take those opportunities?
I would open. So a lot of what we do is civilian. So we can. A lot of it is dual use. I would say a lot of what companies in Scotland have specialised over the years is more geared towards a civilian side. But there is a big opportunity on the defence side, and I haven't.
Therefore, if there are those opportunities, you've got to get out there and sell.
Yes.
What is available in Scotland, and we've heard repeatedly today and in all of our evidence that we have a very good product to sell, and Scotland has real potential there. But if there is any hesitation from the Scottish Government because of their own, political views in terms of defence, they may not be selling our space sector as much globally because of those links, and where they would be doing it would be events that have both defence and space together.
I can't say that we have been in a case ourselves like that. Our difficulties on selling to defence have been more from the fact that we are small, and so we are not able to actually, in some cases, engage with MOD. This is not to say that there could be a strategy to actually, from the Scottish Government, to actually extend the applications to defence, and probably promote that to UK defence. To promote Scottish companies, yes, that is something that could be done, and from our perspective, it would be quite interesting.
Yeah, I can't think of examples where there was I noticed the lack of something from the Scottish side necessarily, but you wouldn't necessarily notice it, but I haven't seen anything either. So, in any time that Scotland can support us, can help us find the right organizations, that's always helpful. The only, I guess maybe the positive thing I can say is that there is a Scottish representative for DASA, which I can't think of what DASA stands for. It's basically the R&D, new technology development, arm related to the MOD, and there is someone in Scotland who kind of is the representative here, and I think that program does a good job in facilitating conversations, but beyond that I've seen nothing.
Mr. Gomes or Mr. Anderson, maybe Mr. Anderson, because you touched on it with my colleague Mr. Duguid. In your evidence session that you provided, page 5, paragraph 7.4, speaking about the Scottish strategy, you say an omission from the Scottish strategy is how to support existing businesses to scale and grow. Why do you think that is omitted from the Scottish strategy, and what opportunities have you had to get that included going forward, and if you've had those opportunities, how has that been received?
I think we've covered quite a lot of it already in terms of it is a difficult thing. I think really that the strategy, the answer is that the Scottish Government, if we think about that specifically, would need to become the customer, sort of drive that procurement activity, and we have not seen that as part of the strategy, so that has not been included.
They could help existing businesses scale and grow without just being the customer. Customer would be important, but they have other levers that they can use to assist businesses, and you're very clear in your evidence that is an omission, and I assume since you put it in there so prominently, you've got reasons why that's been omitted and what they could maybe do to resolve that.
This is true. Yes, I think there's going to be a few examples probably shortly where we've seen companies come in to Scotland more recently, and that hasn't been massively helpful when there's been other existing industries there, and we have found in the short term that's been quite difficult. So any kind of momentum we might have built over the last 12 to 18 months has felt like it's been sort of certainly tempered, to be polite. So I think that's certainly something that, in terms of a strategy, more overarchingly, it's making sure that the Scottish Government and the Scottish sector recognises what they have. If there is a certain amount of money to be given out, in whatever mechanism that might be, that it is then for those companies that exist. I think at the very, very start, you mentioned that it is now an end-to-end representation, and that is very much the case. There's probably some very nuanced gaps in there, some super scientific stuff or some other supply chain elements. So I'm not sitting here saying I have the exact map in front of me, but give or take, whatever you might need, you could come to Scotland, and I'm pretty confident you could get that done. So I think that's primarily what we're referring to in there, is that it's the absence of, rather than any necessarily kind of conflicting policies at the moment.
And because you notice the absence of, you call it an omission in here, is there good discussions, relationships in the formation of these strategies that you could have highlighted that at an earlier stage, or are you just presented with the Scottish strategy and said, this is going to impact your business, your sector, and this is it? Do you think there could be better relations in terms of the formation of these?
I think there has been reasonable engagement, to be honest with you. So Space Scotland has been around for a number of years, though it's probably been about 2 or 3 years ago that it kind of made a bit of a jump from the SSLC, the Scottish Space Leadership Council, which was an organically formed organisation which sort of reached out and brought in government members, and we had everyone from Scottish Enterprise through to Scottish Government themselves appear there. We have found that in the last 2 years there has been a much more concerted effort, and there has been a formalisation of that into Space Scotland. We ourselves at AAC Clyde Space, and I'm sure Theresa can comment as well, have had a lot more engagement with Scottish ministers. Ivan McKee previously and Richard Lochhead more recently have come and visited and have listened. Following up on that is something that we're still pushing at, and I'm not entirely sure we've really kind of got our legs under the table on that just yet. But we see this session as obviously part of that story, right? It's sort of part of that momentum building we're trying to do.
I suppose finally, if I can, Chair, I mean, I've raised this at previous sessions. Where are we in terms of the space sector being recognised by the Scottish public? Are you happy that they know something happened and they've maybe got a general understanding that we produce more satellites than anywhere else in Europe? Would it be good and beneficial to you if they knew more, or is it key decision makers you've got to get that message across to? Just, we have very exciting times ahead, both in Sutherland and up in Shetland. But they can also come with big disappointments depending what happens there. And are the public in the right place in Scotland about the space sector, about the opportunities, but also about the realism involved with what you're all trying to do?
I think there are opportunities to do better. I always take the test of the taxi drivers. When I say what I do, they always ask me what I do, and I say when I'm going from the airport home or something like that, and they always get very surprised that when I tell them that Glasgow is probably produces more satellites than anywhere else in Europe. So there is definitely room for improvement. I think, as you say, there will be big events coming up in Sutherland, and yes, they can go well or they can go bad. So I think a campaign to inform the public in Scotland is important. I think the more we can do about that, the better. I don't think it's just about Scotland. I think is a UK general problem. People are very unaware of how important the sector is. But in Scotland, given the opportunities that we've got, particularly around Glasgow, with all the companies that are based there, I think there is a huge opportunity to actually spread the word and make people much more aware of what space does for them every day. We are big employers in town, particularly in the high-tech sector. So yes, I think it would be good to see more, to see these more advertised.
Yeah, I would say having the general public know what's going on and also how much their lives rely on the space sector today as it is, related to weather or navigation and GPS and all of that, is always going to be good, because then you don't have people writing detracting articles and saying, why is taxpayer money being spent on going to the moon or something like that. So having the public understand the benefits of all of the investment that goes into the space sector, I think is generally just going to be a good thing. And at the end of the day, it is the decision makers that are going to be across DCIT, UKSA, and how they interact with European Space Agency and how they interact with the other kind of leaders that really, and regulators as well, that have a big impact on how this sector grows, how it's viewed outside of the UK as well, internationally, because like it or not, space is, you know, one of the truly, truly global industries that does impact geopolitics and, you know, macroeconomic environment and all these other things. And so I think it is important how the UK sector is viewed outside of the UK as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Leonhardt.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our panel. I'm just going to ask a few questions on skills training. And we've heard that the space sector has difficulty finding the skilled workforce it needs. Is this your experience? Can I go to you first, Ms. Condor?
We're always trying to hire people, and recruiting is a constant discussion inside our company, and that's the case in Scotland. It's the case for our location in the United States. It's the case everywhere in the world, that everybody is fighting for talent, and I don't think that's unique to Scotland. I think that's just the state of the world.
You got anything to add, Mr. Gomes?
Just agree. I think we have. I can put you in number. I can put this a bit in numbers. We have about 90 people in Scotland. We should have about 110. And the difficulty has been actually hiring the talent. Has been finding the people to actually fill those vacancies. So that has
an immediate need.
We have got an immediate need. We do a lot of bringing graduates from universities, but where we find a huge difficulty in hiring is that 5-10 years, like Peter mentioned before, that 5-10 years experience. The leaders in engineering, the people that bring that experience to actually lead projects and lead the technology development. That's where we find a huge gap, and this is global. It's not just us, and it has an impact on our day-to-day operations. So our ability to deliver our projects is hampered by that, and the opportunity to grow.
So what about apprenticeships? Do you recruit apprentices?
We recruit. It's for small companies is not always easy. The management of the process, the management of the apprenticeships, and it's also a long game. It's a long process to actually bring those resources online. And when you are desperate for people, you tend to experienced people that can actually. It becomes an hindrance because you are managing the today, and you sometimes have to. You don't have the time or the resources to actually manage the tomorrow. So preparing the tomorrow is difficult.
So, in terms of recruitment, do you mainly recruit from Scotland and the UK, or do you recruit from outside the UK? I'll go to Mr. Gomes first, or Mr. Anderson.
So as we mentioned, it's a truly global industry, like Theresa was mentioning. And as such, the workforce is very global. We tend, of course, to hire a lot more people from Scotland, local, but we cast our net very wide in the search for experience in particular. Some countries have much more people available in certain areas, and so we will hire from those countries. But our preference is to stay local if we can. It's less costly for us, but it's a global industry, so we are always going to have a percentage of people that come from abroad.
So when you're recruiting from outside the UK, which country is it any country? Which country particularly seems to be trained in the space sector?
It depends very much on the areas.
Okay.
So traditionally, and I'm actually talking more of past experience rather than our current experience, some countries in Europe, for instance, provided many skills in what we call attitude control systems and system engineering. So there were some countries like traditionally like Spain, Italy, Germany that produced lots of experienced people in those.
Why
in those
do they produce more experienced people than we do?
They're the biggest investors in space.
In space,
So they put the most money into ESA, they put the most money into their industry.
And also in some cases they don't have, many of the graduates that will go into those areas come from mathematics, physics, and for instance the UK has there is a lot of competition for those skills from, for instance, the financial sector. So those countries don't have so much competition for those skills, so it's easier for them to be. In other cases, we are hiring, for instance, a lot from India these days. Turkey is producing quite a lot of highly skilled engineers. I had that experience from the past, working with, for instance, with Turkish industry. So those are countries that are currently providing quite a lot of skilled, very good quality engineers and project managers that we use.
Thank you. Ms. Condor, to add to that, there seems to be a sort of lack of women in the space sector. You're probably one of the few wonderful women working in the space sector. Why is this, and what can be done to encourage more women to go into this sector?
Yeah, well, I think historically it has to do with STEM education and the number of people that are going into STEM education and then graduating as engineers and being interested in space. I think you are seeing more women coming into this sector now, though, actually, and I think that's because it no longer has this kind of like, oh, I'm really into Star Wars and, you know, I want to go to Mars and, you know, I'm really into science fiction. But it actually is much more about today, how are you making the world a better place? What are you doing about climate? You know, what are you doing about more efficient supply chains? You know, all of these things. What are you doing about more efficient agriculture? So I think as the space sector is starting to be more and more focused on how does space make life better here on Earth, you do start to see more people from different types of sectors, different types of backgrounds. I'm not myself an engineer, coming into the sector and finding it interesting, understanding the mission behind why a lot of companies are in this sector. And I think that's what it takes too, is a lot of that type of discussion.
It's a rapidly growing sector and you have an immediate need for skills, but looking at more long term, the new advanced British standard in education that the Prime Minister announced quite recently will take the best of A-levels and T-levels and replace them, bringing them together in a technical and academic routes into a single qualification. The government has cited education models of many European countries as proof that we need the standard, but a key feature of these countries' models is technical education from age 13 to 14. Whilst the advanced British standard doesn't apply to Scotland, it's devolved, education has devolved. Do you think that technical education from 13 to 14 in Scotland and in the rest of the UK would facilitate more people entering the space sector if they started technical education earlier? Who wants to take that first?
I can start.
Okay.
Just because I myself started my, in a different country, I started my technical education around 14. Okay. And I think it's an important aspect of actually showing people very early on what it gives you, what technology and science. But we shouldn't probably but then can also be restrictive, because then conversely you have people that, oh well, I haven't started at that point, so I will not going to take technical education. So I think is a dangerous thing to just focus too much on that. But I think it's important. It attracts people at that age and gives them an experience of what it's working in science and technology, and so they should be we should gives them a choice. Yeah. But it shouldn't be. But we have to be careful with the opposite. That is, then people say, well, I didn't start, so now even if I like it, even if I had a talent to it that developed a bit later in age, now I'm not going to join the sector or join the science and technology area. So I think it can be a little bit dangerous.
Flexibility is key. Ms. Condor.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of experience with the educational system outside of the United States, where we don't have that kind of specialty. I could see the benefit of having at a young age people getting exposed to it and more interested in it. But at the same time, the restrictiveness of you going into that route and having to decide very, very young, I mean, that's also very different than how the U.S. system works and the one that I'm more familiar with. So I feel like I don't have a great opinion one way or the other.
That's fine. I'll move on to the next question.
Before you do, sorry, I think Mr. Duguid want to come in on skills.
Just very quickly, on the Advanced British Standard, and I have checked this on the floor of the House, it is available to be adopted by devolved administrations, but it is for devolved administrations to choose so. But I was going to ask about, and sticking with the school education, and it's very interesting to hear, Mr. Gomes, your particular experience. I represent a constituency in the northeast of Scotland, and I remember when I was at school, and it's still an ongoing thing with the oil and gas industry, would outreach to schools, and more there's more renewable energy type activity being local companies coming into schools to basically get kids interested in that as a career, starting as young as possible. I was just wondering if that's something the space industry is doing. Presumably your companies are doing something like that in the Glasgow area, but is it something that there could be an opportunity to do across the wider Scotland?
I think one of the challenges that the space industry has always faced is the diversity of skills that we need. We are talking about people coming from electronics, people coming from software, as I said, physics, mathematics. It's the kind of industry that requires quite a variety of skills, and so sometimes it's difficult to actually go to young people and tell them, look, go this way, go this route, or train this. One thing that I think we don't do enough, and we want, is one of my objectives for the company, not just in our Scottish companies, but globally, is to interact more, is to help more, for instance, high school children that want to do satellites, rockets. There are activities, particularly the US does have those kind of activities more than in Europe or the UK. But there are activities where high school students can actually go and build a satellite. The kind of CubeSats we do actually opens the door to that. That's a great way of actually bringing people into the industry, showing them that it's not that difficult, learning the things that, for instance, I never learned.
It's not actually rocket science.
It's not rocket science. There are several groups in my own country. There are teams that are actually doing that. Even if they never launch the satellites, they actually at least get involved. One thing I would like to do is to bring high school children into our operations and to allow them to develop software and code that, for instance, they can upload into satellites. That's something that we've got a few old satellites that are now reaching end of life, and we can actually use them.
Just conscious we've got another panel to come in and we've got further work to consider, so back to Sally and Hart.
Thank you. You mentioned, Mr. Gomes, challenges in finding and recruiting and retaining more experienced staff. And in our previous session, we heard concerns about new entrants into the market, attracting staff from existing companies, in effect cannibalising these companies. Is that something you recognise? I think you did touch on it earlier, but perhaps just spell it out a bit better.
Yes, I think this comes back to the point about having a metric as just number of jobs that you create on a new investment, but also Mr. Ross's comment on the scaling up and the growing and having or not. There is a tendency many times to actually invite new companies into Scotland, and this happens also at UK level. Offering them quite good terms, offering them money to come over to Scotland, and forgetting that there are companies already operating in Scotland that are being successful and that require some funding to grow. And what you do when you bring these companies on the metric of jobs created is that they have an obligation to actually hire a lot of people. There is a finite pool of experienced talent. There is one case specifically, we lost 5 or 6 of our senior engineers in 1 week to go and work somewhere else, and I had to go.
It wasn't to Spire, was it?
No, it wasn't Spire. No, I
we all know the company.
No, it's another company. we have had our. There is this kind of rotating. We are in the same building, so there is this rotation of staff.
We all know each other.
But this is another company, and at the same time, I had to actually put up the salaries of all our staff quite a lot to defend us. And that is quite difficult, and this is why I think sometimes looking at the long term, the metric should be what is the long term plan, what is the revenue, what is going to grow, because if not, you just endanger the existing industry. We got into a lot of difficulties to deliver projects when we lost those people. So that's actually quite it's a dangerous thing for the existing companies when that is done a bit. Shall I use the word heavy-footed? Is probably what comes to mind.
That cannibalization can happen internally as well, in terms of some regional investment and sort of facilities or investments being made in areas where it's not necessarily clear that there was already something there. So I might give you the example in terms of small satellite testing, and if the facilities that might be getting invested in are not almost local to the two companies sat in front of you, plus one other in Scotland, maybe Alba Orbital. Who's using that? Who's that for? And I think a big part of this comes down to who's assessing the cases. And I might even say in some of the external inward investment as well, as who's actually helping those agencies and outfits to actually assess their business plan, because I'm sure it sounds great. They say we can do all these things, we're going to bring all these jobs, big boom. Who's actually helping those agencies to say, that's probably not a very good business plan? Who's actually helping them to assess that and actually putting that question up and saying, I wouldn't believe them necessarily they may not know themselves. I'm not saying they're being unscrupulous, but certainly there's a lot of ambition in the industry and a lot of folks saying they're going to rule the world, and actually, we can give you some good examples.
Not enough competition, is there?
No.
Okay, we'll maybe just leave it hanging at that remark.
Anything to add?
No, just that I think competition is good, and I think inward investment to Scotland is good. And there has been a great effort to do that, and at the end of the day, we're all going to benefit from a growing sector that is more known. I think there have for sure been short-term cases that we're all aware of, where everyone is slightly miffed at poaching versus trying to expand the skill base overall. I think that's a short-term problem.
You're not alone in developing sectors about trying to secure the skills that you require. But thank you all ever so much. I knew this would be a really interesting and fascinating session. And again, thank you all for allowing us to visit and being so generous with your time. And we've got a record of that conversation, which will also add to the consideration of our inquiry and report. But for just now, thank you ever so much. And what we'll do is seamlessly move to our next guests, and we won't suspend the session. So if our next guest would like to come forward, please. And thank you. Yeah, let's be there. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, gentlemen. There was a lot of interest in that session, as you could tell, and some detailed questions as well as detailed answers, as we always get in select committees. But we will move seamlessly into this next session. We now have representatives with Scottish agencies which support the sector, and we will now let them introduce themselves and perhaps tell us a little bit about what they do. And we'll start with you, Mr. Aitken.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm delighted to be here with Bryan. I'm the Managing Director of International Operations at Scottish Enterprise, and as part of that I run Scottish Development International. Scottish Enterprise, as you well know, is the National Economic Development Agency. Over the last 5 years, our work supported 75,000 jobs and an additional £900 million of tax take over that period. What we want to see, though, is more investment, more innovation, and companies scale to transform the economy. And Scotland's space industry really is a positive part of that. It's on a positive trajectory. So since 2016, we've seen a 65% increase in the business space. But I think that's the tip of the iceberg for the ambitions, and you've heard that from the companies just before us. We want to see 20,000 jobs and £4 billion of the global market share in Scotland by 2031, and that is a stretching target, and there will be others who support us in delivering that. To do this, we need to capitalise on the end-to-end opportunity from R&D, manufacturing, as you've heard about, launch, but really focus in on space data. Downstream is particularly important, and I think we will see serious growth, the most serious growth in space-enabled data companies. And I think what's often categorised as new space by the industry. So we want to see that grow alongside traditional space. And then we'll get those near-term benefits on Earth and the significant commercial opportunities that flow from that. I'll pause there because otherwise I'll wax lyrical, but really looking forward to getting into the conversation with you today. And I'll hand over to Bryan.
Mr. Fraser.
Thanks. I'm Bryan Fraser from our Business Growth Division. We have responsibility for the delivery of advice and funding for growth SMEs. That's kind of categorised into three categories: innovation, international and investment. As well as our account management service, we also have a range of specialist teams, so we have a flexible offer. We're able to tailor that to the needs of business at their particular stage of growth, whether they're an academic spin-out, early stage, with high potential, likely to scale at pace, like some of the companies we've heard from today, right the way through to large companies, global FDI companies, where that's about expanding their operations in Scotland and building their engagement with the Scottish supply chain. The majority of the businesses we work with and support are SMEs, and we work with them either directly through a sustained relationship in our account management service over a sustained period of time to help them execute their growth ambitions.
I know you were both listening intently to the last session there, which was very informative, and we heard a little bit just about what the sector feels it needs in order to develop and grow, and some of the problems and challenges around upscaling, for example, has been mentioned. What do you practically do to help the space sector? I mean, I know a lot of it comes down to resource and money, and everybody wants more of that, but what, as organisations, can you specifically offer the sector to help them deal with the variety of challenges that we heard in the last session, Mr. Aitken? Sure. Or do you want to get
so we have a range of support, and it is tailored depending on the stage that the business is at. When they're earlier stage, that tends to be dominated by investment and innovation support, building the first commercial hires in the business. But when they get more to the medium size, it can be more around building through our workplace innovation support, developing people attraction, retention strategies. Could be larger R&D funding and innovation support, but also through to their exporting, and that's the sort of support that we're able to provide directly, either through our specialist advisors, supported on occasions through our grant support, but it's also working across our partners to unlock support across the public sector in Scotland and beyond, collaborative funding that's available to support businesses, as well as helping them with their, I guess, their people strategy, which is a key thing we heard earlier.
Of course, Scottish Enterprise, what we've heard, most of the activities characterised as SME, as small, medium enterprises. What distinction do you make for the space sector? What specifically do you do to assist and support them?
So I guess we work with both SMEs and also global companies. On the SME side in the space sector, we tend to use a suite of products, so whether it's advanced manufacturing support, whether it's skills support, or whether it's export support, and then we target that using the sector analysis and data that we have. So recent examples, we've got our, for instance, bringing together the industry with customers who previously might not have seen space data as the solution to their problems. This is obviously quite nascent, but that is what's going to drive the customer base for these companies rather than it being predicated on grant funding. So that's very specific to the space sector. Similarly, targeted export missions are absolutely critical. We've had obviously the UK's event last week. Before that, my team was in Bremen, taking a number of companies, getting them into C primes overseas, and to be able to make those connections, meet the buyers so that they can get our products and services, our space products and services into market.
I see there's a Scottish Government space group. How regularly do these meet, and to give us a sort of flavour of some of the conversations, outcomes that these meetings might have?
So it's quite close-knit engagement. It's quite regular and frequent. When I was talking to my team in preparation for coming today, I did the sort of first name test of who is it who you call in the Scottish Government if you want to make progress on an issue. And if, as long as they can tell me by the first name who it is, then I know the relationship works. Mm-hmm. So the relationship works. It's got a good basis at kind of working level, and at a more senior level we engage in a structured way. The ministerial commitment has been really helpful in this. So Minister McKee previously was very much a keen advocate of the industry, and we've seen that followed up by Minister Lockhead, and he was out in market 2 weeks ago in Bremen, again promoting the industry, and he's been putting himself onto a global platform to promote it. So the relationship is strong, I think, between us and the Scottish Government. The teams are quite small, if I can have
you all pass the first name test then?
Yes, exactly.
That's a relief. I think we're all pleased to hear that. I mean, like, so would you say that you have an understanding about the sector, that you understand what it wants, you've got an appreciation about some of the difficult opportunities? Is that how both of your organisations would say your relationship with the space sector is good, reasonable, productive?
Yeah, I think we have really strong relationships with the sector. There are always going to be challenges. They're always going to want more in terms of funding and support. And I think there is a good level of understanding. Some of it is rocket science. We're not rocket scientists, so we're not going to be able to understand.
Just lastly, and I don't know if you could help me with this, we've got this figure through which says that Scotland receives 3% of the UK's European Space Agency contracts. Is that figure accurate, and where did it come from? And could you maybe talk us through how we got to this number, and whether it's something that's reflective of the size of the sector in Scotland?
So my understanding is that number is accurate, and my understanding is also that it's not reflective of our fair share, or the share that we'd like to have in Scotland. I think the data, if I'm right, relates to 2013 onwards, and is over the last period how much of the public award we've managed to secure for Scottish companies. Our internal work at Scottish Enterprise says that Scottish companies account for about 14% of space GDP, UK space GDP, so there's quite a delta there. I think it does reflect some of the characteristics of our industry over the period, during that period, so predominantly SME, where some of the contracts will have gone to larger players, and there are primes down south, whereas we don't have as many primes. However, I think there are real inroads we can make into capitalising on that and turning that number round. And what's been really welcome from my point of view is I think there is an appetite in the UK Space Agency and in ESA to improving. It's
quite a disparity, isn't it? If it's 3% of UK's European Space Agency contract, you're talking about 14% of GDP. I mean, like, that's a big gap. And what is there any explanation as to why it's so big?
So as I was sort of setting out, this SME-dominated landscape means that it's harder to win those big contracts, go through the big procurements that the ESA sets out. If I'm completely honest, I'd be quite interested to see the data set for the overall UK as well, because I'm not sure we bring back quite as much as we could, and I think that it's meant to be geographically located, so you're meant to get back what you
that's what it was explained to us, and so that's why we're interested in this figure. Maybe you could give us the committee a note just about that figure and how that was compiled, and just where it come from. And
I think it comes from the Space Agency themselves. Okay. So yeah, really.
If you could help
really happy
with that, it'd be really helpful. Thank you for me, and it's Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Just looking at the barriers to Scottish space businesses scaling up, we heard earlier that there are barriers to them scaling up. Do you think, I mean, you've mentioned about SMEs and applying for ESA procurement. Do you think that there is an issue with SMEs and Scottish businesses scaling up?
So I think there are real challenges, and you heard that from the previous witnesses. I think there are also huge strengths that we can draw on. So the strategic concentration of our companies means it's easy. It's so important to collaborate, to compete. You were talking about competition.
Do they cluster?
And they do, and they could do it more. Obviously, when you have very high-powered, very impressive spin-outs, they get very focused on their niche, their R&D, and I think sometimes our role is to broker and bring that together. We've seen some examples of that where sort of seed corn funding has actually led to sort of significant collaborations. So on the back of the Sustainable Space Roadmap, we didn't want that to be a dusty document. We wanted it to be active. So we put some, with some others, we put some sort of small amounts of 360k into that. And sort of the 12 company projects that came off it, we're now seeing collaborations between those companies who formed as a result of that, and they're just one collaboration has just won an ESA award. So there's a pipeline that you can take companies on, but it's quite labour intensive, and scaling up is very challenging. More on commercial contracts is the other thing that you heard loud and clear from the previous witnesses, and I think we are trying to broker that relationship again. If I'm completely honest, a former civil servant, I wouldn't have thought of space data as the solution to some of the problems that when I was sitting either in Whitehall or up in the Scottish Government. And so I think there's an education piece and a piece of getting industry in there to explain what the problems are that those officials are facing, and then what the solutions can be in a space-enabled way. And that brokering, again, is something we're looking to do more of. And the industry keeps developing so fast that there are increasing opportunities for us to do that.
So, question off the back of that then, would you say that, my question to you, is there enough access to the relevant data so the SMEs can build strategies for growth? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think the SMEs often get treated as a sort of homogenous group, and they're quite varied. So you're sort of 20-person, Series A raising finance might be quite different to your 150-person who might have the regulatory nous and the ability to navigate some of the complicated procurement. So there are different SMEs within that group. All of them, I think, could be supported by us to help with meet the buyer type events, so they're really clear at what they're targeting and what the opportunities are. And I think there's an interesting challenge for us in terms of how focused we are in directing their energies. And that was coming across at the previous panel, saying you could be more dictatorial in saying these are the areas that we really want to focus on, whereas I think we have tried to foster a competitive industry and allow them to drive the innovation because they've done such a good job of it. But providing more data and more insights is always useful to customers, to our clients, and businesses do come to us with all sorts of requests, and we service those requests obviously for free. That's part of our service. So yeah.
Okay. You mentioned just earlier, sorry, I will, if there's anything you want to add, Mr. Fraser.
Yeah, just on the support them. So our account managers will work intensively with businesses, particularly at an early stage, to form their strategy and bring in other specialists to help them with embed the capabilities they don't have. So some of the things that we've done recently with businesses in this sector are workplace development, talent development, training plans, so that we can accelerate that transferable skill set that we heard about is missing into becoming more specialists with space expertise. We have an equity finance products, but when you reach a larger stage as an organisation, they tend to be less relevant. So recently we've had hosted a delegation of international VCs to come over and meet space companies so they can pitch. That has a dual benefit of raising the profile of a cohort of businesses to pitch, but also to give them access to institutional investors that they might not otherwise have the access to.
So just looking at the VCs, we're quite good as a country, UK, at investing in startups, but not so good in growing the businesses, scaling them up. So are the VCs be able to give that extra funding, or do the SMEs look to other funding to get that further investment in their company?
So I hosted that VC delegation, and there were a mix in there. So Series A, B, and C. So the delegation was mainly tilted towards the earlier stage, the Series A, because we had more companies to showcase at that stage. But there were some who would definitely be looking to do bigger ticket sizes and to invest in those bigger scaling up propositions. And we talked about it being you have to be global by birth in the space sector, and so some of our companies have got those right ambitions, and what they're saying is, actually, I need to raise not a mil, I need to raise 10 mil in order to be able to crack into the US at the moment. And it's great to hear that ambition, and so once we've got that and they've got a good business plan that we've worked on them with, and a good total addressable market with their products and services, then we can definitely help introduce them to some of those investors. I'll be taking again, as part of a business delegation to COP, some space data companies who can highlight what they can do in the climate space. And again, we're going to be meeting with investors in the UAE. So I think that's absolutely critical in terms of helping them bridge that gap and matchmaking. So you're not got a investor who's only interested in smaller ticket size dealing with companies who are desperate to scale. They will all be looking at the business model, though, and the contracts and the revenue that these companies can generate. So they need to be serious and credible as well.
So you're doing quite a lot to sort of help the SMEs looking at the funding landscape and supporting them. You mentioned earlier other help you're doing with the SMEs. Are there any specific schemes in place to help businesses scale up? And if so, what's the take-up been of the schemes?
Yeah, so we do have initiatives around that. So programs, for example, non-exec director program. We have our venture fund, which we co-invest with the private sector into businesses, very much targeted at really ambitious, innovation-driven businesses like in the space sector. The take-up is good. We have finite resources, so we're able to undertake prioritisation there, and I suspect in this sector particularly that's growing is reflected in the growth in the company base.
Okay. And in terms, as far as you're both aware, what are the main reasons why our Scottish businesses find it difficult to scale up? Can you pinpoint any particular?
So across the economy, or just in space?
Just in space.
Just in space. So commercial contracts are absolutely fundamental, and the process of navigating the requirements to meet the awards by ESA and others are challenging. I think one of the things that we have heard, and you've heard it again today, is government procurement. So when government can act as that anchor. And I've certainly taken businesses to meet other governments who've asked us that question of saying, this fantastic company, fantastic service, does the government back home buy this service? And we've had to sort of quickly move on to the next question because they don't yet at that point. So I think that's, again, an opportunity for us to turn the dial. And I think sort of finally around space, there is the fact that it's moving so fast, and so there's a lot of competition for talent. And so what they end up finding is that there is someone coming with a even brighter idea next door who can pay a bit more, and then they lose their talent, and then their plans for scaling are sort of stymied.
Thank you. Mr. Fraser, do you have anything?
Key
things why?
Not specifically. I mean, the talent is a big one, both in terms of the software and the engineering, but also commercial skills. A lot of the businesses at an earlier stage, maybe the academic spin out, so have some technical capabilities. So we do have programs and opportunities to connect them with commercial skills. We can de-risk that at times through the provision of some temporary grant funding to make a first hire that makes the business more credible, is able to fulfill the role of be more commercial as well, which is not something necessarily they're able to do without that type of support.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to our witnesses. Can I go back, first of all, Ms. Aitken, to what you were saying about the potential? I think you said £4 billion of market share, and that may be a stretch. Is that correct? Just explain that figure to us.
So that's the target from the Scottish Government strategy, 10-year strategy by 2031. That is a share of a huge global market. So the overall global market is going to be over $400 billion at that stage. So it is achievable, but to be able to do it, it's a globally competitive industry space, and we are seeing folks who are our competitors around Europe and elsewhere, seeing that we've got stolen a slight march and are looking to catch up on our progress. So we are...
If that's a stretch, what's realistic?
So I think that's realistic. It's a good stretch ambition.
It's a stretch, but it's also realistic.
Can be both.
I think so. I think you can have a stretch target that you also achieve.
Okay.
That's what we're aiming to do. I think the ultimate target is that we will take the industry as far as it can with the skills and the budgets that we've got. I think demonstrating that commitment and that we want that market share is also a good signal to investors and others that we're going to stand alongside them and partner with this industry.
So you take these government figures out to the international market and say this is what the Scottish Government say about X, Y or Z, it's in our strategy, therefore can we get investment, etc.
Yeah, I think
So there's got to be a lot of trust in these figures.
Yes.
Yeah. And you've previously come to this committee back in March of this year when we're speaking about wind energy. You'll know where I'm going to with this. How confident are you that the shambolic episode we saw with the Scottish Government claiming that Scotland could have 25% of Europe's wind energy is not going to be repeated? And given what has occurred since then, and ministers potentially misleading Parliament, we are writing as a committee to previous SNP ministers who've used wind energy figures, is there a risk that confidence in what the Scottish Government are saying as targets and what is achievable is diminished by the lies that have been told over wind energy?
Okay, right, order. I think let's try to stick to parliamentary language and discuss if we can.
Mistruths that have been told over wind energy. Does that have an impact?
Just doing the same thing.
Does that have an impact in terms of you then going out with new figures in another area and the confidence that will have been diminished as a result of that?
So we have really trusting relationships with the investors and the global partners that we work with. People still do business with people, and so I think the relationships are absolutely key. Whenever there's any errors in any sort of data and figures, we correct it, we make sure people are aware of that. We haven't seen any adverse impacts in our relationships with investors and others as a result of that.
Just on that, you were speaking about the 20 I can't remember, back in March. Were you aware of the corrections that had been made to the Scottish Government's targets back then?
Can we just...
Well, I'm just, because we're speaking about correcting.
Order. We're here to discuss the Scottish space sector. We've not got all that much time with colleagues from Scottish Enterprise STI. Is it possible that we might be able to stay on the subject so we could secure the best possible information and evidence from our witnesses?
I'm happy to stay on the subject I was going on. So in terms of corrections that you ultimately make, were you aware when you gave that evidence back in March that it wasn't a reliable figure on the wind energy?
So was I aware at the time of the figures that we were using?
Mm-hmm.
So I always use the figures that we think are the accurate figures.
Provided by the Scottish Government. And there's some conflict now in terms of when they first became aware, we were told it was an outdated... Are you not allowing this line of questioning, Chair?
I'm wanting to have a line of questioning which is at least slightly in line with the evidence, the report and the inquiry that we're conducting today. Now, please conclude your question. Can we then move on to discussing the Scottish space sector and see if we could get some useful information from our colleagues on that?
Interesting sensitivity from the SNP Chair. So I will take on board what he said and move on to the point I made. You were in the room...
You spoke over before.
Yes, Mr. Bryan. Yeah.
When you didn't like my line of questioning, which I thought was out of order, but we're here to discuss the space sector.
Okay, order. I think we've established we're here to discuss the space sector, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Mr. Ross.
I was making, I'm not sure what Mr. Bryan was saying there, it was difficult to follow. But in terms of the question I put to the previous panel, and you were both in the room at the time, are there any examples where there are opportunities for Scotland to be promoted internationally that are not taken because of a link between the space sector and the defence sector, because of ministerial beliefs in terms of promoting either or both of these sectors?
I don't have evidence of that being the case. We have prioritised the space opportunities according to the market opportunities that we see.
Here to say that Scottish ministers are keener to promote the space sector than Scotland's place in the defence sector, and at times there will be a conflict when the two come together at international events, for example. We've certainly heard of examples where people were surprised that Scotland didn't have a stand or people representing Scotland to attract people in, and you're nodding your head, Mr. Aitken.
Yeah, so this came up recently at the, I was engaging with the aerospace and defence sector body and the sort of number of the industry members in Scotland, and the incident in question was actually a resource question. So we have limited budgets. We'd love to be able to promote more of Scotland's economy, and if it's the event that I'm thinking of, there's a really good job done at promoting the industry by the primes, and also by colleagues in DBT as well. And so sometimes we have to pick and choose, and we think, being very honest, a small Scottish stand next to a huge stand for a prime doesn't necessarily give us the best bang for our buck. So sometimes we're really happy for industry to lead on the promotion. We're very supportive of what they're doing, and we have to just cut our cloth according to the budget. Who takes that
decision to make those choices, and what's it based on?
So the decisions for Scottish Enterprise and for Scottish Development International, they're taken by me and the team. So we'll review the events for the next year and say, what's the return on investment of this event over the last X number of years? What's the sales that's generated? Do we think that is an area which needs significant support? And then, of quite a long list, we can only do a small number. During the course of the year, sometimes more budget becomes available, and we can bump things up and we can add to it, and we have to leverage the networks that we've got, and we do that to good effect. So there's some really strong examples recently with DBT supporting Scottish companies that we didn't have the bandwidth to support, or supporting in markets where I've got 287 folks in 23 countries, but we've got basically no one in Africa. So if we're looking to target those markets, it's so important we use other sources to get into those markets where that's what our companies need.
So you've heard the same criticism as we've heard. How do you respond to that? Is that something you will change going forward, that there was disappointment?
So we were engaging with the industry, and we always look at it based on the evidence. So one of the things that I found coming into post is we didn't, just in terms of how we collect data, we didn't collect it as defence necessarily, so we'd collect it as advanced manufacturing potentially, or it would fall under other sectors in terms of our programmes and products and support. So one of the things that I did with the industry was just try to set out with a bit more clarity, these are the areas that we do support, sectors or subsectors within that industry, and I think based on data we'll be looking at the decision we're making for next financial year, and we've been taking representations from the aerospace and defence industry, but also from a lot of other sectors who are saying, if you supported us, we could also sell more, we could do more. So it's always going to be tough competition, and we're always going to base it on the data available around future export sales, which is a key indicator for the trade events, and investment flows, which is the key reason we take companies out.
Finally, Mr. Fraser, how do you view the work done by individual enterprise agencies across Scotland to help the space sector?
Yeah, so we work well together, I think, across the three agencies and with Skills Development Scotland as part of the Business Support Partnership to coordinate our support. We co-design products. We look for opportunities to bring cohorts of companies together. I think we can always build on that. That's for sure, and we would seek to do so. But as a collective, I think that works pretty well.
And if in an area, for example, Highlands have two conflicting bids for investment and for support, do you think you've handled that well? Has it been handled well, looking at it?
For grant support?
Well, for general support.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of that being an issue. We run an active portfolio of we work with more than 3,000 businesses a year directly with one-to-one support.
You've got two spaceports, one in Sutherland and one in Shetland, both in HIE's area. Does that cause any challenges, or do you think they've both been offered the same support, looking at it from a national perspective?
I think there's four potential spaceports all in High's area.
There are two that are extremely developed. If you look at Machrihanish, and otherwise they're nowhere near as advanced as Sutherland and Saxford.
And from my point of view, those having the full end-to-end launch capacity right down to the data stuff is a kind of that's a USP for us amongst Europe. And so I think, from my point of view, I want both of them to succeed if possible.
You think High have supported them both identically throughout?
We haven't had any challenges in terms of representations from companies that I'm aware of in regard to differentiated support between those.
Your evidence to this committee would be that both these spaceports in the Highlands have been supported in exactly the same way to get them to this level?
I think High is coming along to the committee, so we'd be best placed to answer that in due course.
It's useful to hear from you as well, which is why I'm putting the question.
Yeah,
I think the support would be approved by High for those. We can certainly find out if we've offered support and follow up, but yeah, that I'm pretty sure would be under High's delegated authority.
Yeah, so we don't have any. I haven't got any issue with how High have been dealing with it, or haven't received any complaints that have come my way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alan Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Just to return to the defence theme briefly, you'd heard in the previous session that both companies actually spoke about the difficulty in actually bidding for MOD procurement contracts. Feel there's a lot of barriers, as much because they're SMEs. Is that an issue that you were aware of? Is there any support can be given, or is it really just changes to MOD procurement that's needed?
So it is an issue for SMEs to go through kind of large-scale government or ESA procurements. We know that ESA, for instance, have got a sort of SME outreach type team to try and help them navigate the process. I don't know if the MOD does something similar, but it's certainly something we can pick up off the back of this to see if there's more that could be done to broker that relationship. But yeah, it is something that's raised by the industry with us as an issue and a challenge. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of the SMEs are focusing on sort of more commercial solutions outside of the defence space, and why we're supporting some of those SMEs with that journey, because we think that commercial sort of new space data driven opportunity is easier to capitalise on and easier to navigate.
You mentioned ESA there anyway, so obviously that is an issue that you're aware of in terms of ESA and companies trying to bid in. So what resources are actually available to train or support Scottish SMEs to be able to bid in and get a much bigger slice of the ESA pie?
So there are bid writings, workshops and events that are put on, I think, by ESA directly. In terms of the support that we can provide, we can bring in temporary specialists or to support that process within a business. A key thing for us is trying to embed that capability within the business so they can repeat that process as they go forward. I think the other thing that was mentioned is sometimes for SMEs, the way that the ESA funding is administered, that can sometimes take a long time. It can be off-putting because of the way the payments are structured. But in terms of our support, it's very much geared around building the capabilities within the team and the understanding.
Does the Scottish enterprise and yourselves actually have enough in-house expertise actually to be able to help businesses in this process?
Not directly in that, but we can support the appointment of temporary specialists or that can build those capabilities in teams.
Okay, so you, Scottish Enterprise themselves, would fund that expertise to support businesses?
Yeah.
Sometimes folks who are experts, say in economic appraisal, which is maybe an important part of a business case that they need to submit, that's something that we might embed into a company, for instance. Okay.
And there's been a lot about scaling up and different things, but there's also Astro Agency. In their submissions, they've said in general there's a private investment gap across the UK space sector. So is there a private investment gap that you'd recognise in the Scottish space sector?
So yes, I think there's a kind of systematic issue with equity funding across industries. It's one of the reasons that we've been in the sort of early stage market with the fund that Bryan mentioned earlier, and our co-investment model. That is a gap, that's a strategic gap that we've been looking to plug and we've been working on for a number of years now, and it's applicable to space and applicable to other industries as well. The angel investor community is actually quite strong in Scotland, and that's a strength of ours. But what that can mean is sometimes the venture side of things and the scale and pace that some of our companies want to go at doesn't find that it gets those sorts of investors on tap in Scotland. So we're looking to see what we can do to help bolster that through bringing investors to Scotland and showcasing what there is to invest there. And there's been pretty positive feedback. The market's really tough at the moment in terms of going a bit slower than it has done previously. But we're kind of optimistic that as long as we can present the sort of Scottish strengths to investors, that there is a really good value proposition there. But we don't have a big kind of venture community on tap in Scotland.
And how do you assess what that private investment gap is? And then obviously Taylor, you're saying about bringing investors in, so how do you assess what the actual gap is and the level of funding that's required, and as part of that then bringing investors in?
So a lot of it is actually one-to-one conversations with companies and understanding their growth trajectories, their ambitions, and what finance they'd need to reach that. Bryan mentioned earlier the account management model. We do work quite intensively one-to-one with a number of the companies, and we'll develop business plans alongside them, export plans, all those sorts of strategies that they need to be able to be investable. So gathering up that data, we then develop different products that we can provide that can help bridge that gap, or if it's beyond our financial sort of envelope, then there's the Scottish National Investment Bank, there's the British Business Bank, there's a series of others who can come in to partner with us, and obviously ultimately there's the private market, which is probably the best place to be going for some of these investments.
We also have our growth investment team, specialists that can be brought in as part of our account team with the business to help to map out the funding requirements, for a research service that can look at the size of the market to help bolster business plans to be attractive to investors. So we do have specialists in-house that can work one-to-one with businesses on identifying their total funding requirements and how to sequence and phase those funding rounds.
And is this allied with scale up? Is this really what's needed if we go back to the bidding for ESA fund, and obviously say it's difficult for SMEs, so is the reality that SMEs are not going to get enough money out of ESA, and it comes back to needing scaling up and needing further funding support?
I think also the design of the calls from ESA could target more of the specialties that we have in Scotland. So there's probably a two-way information flow there that would improve the design of the calls that would help. So if there was more about innovative data solutions, then that would play to our SME strengths rather than some of the more traditional space calls that ESA have put out in the past.
And do you have a role in speaking to ESA about changing that? And, you know, I mean,
Yeah,
it seems to say there's a battle openness, but how quickly are they going to move?
Yeah, so we engage mainly through the UK Space Agency, and then that relationship is through the Space Agency to ESA. That's more close. They obviously are funder of ESA, so they have more power in that discussion than we would. So we make sure that our input's made to the UK Space Agency, and then rely on them to broker with ESA. Really.
I mean, as the UK Space Agency, I mean, are they nimble enough, or, you know, there's a suggestion that they've got a focus in maximising overall investment in the space sector that creates a bias in favour of pursuing large investments at the expense of the SMEs. So, I mean, is that a fair accusation to the UK Space Agency?
Previously, they have sort of favoured traditional solutions. I think we've got a good relationship with them. They've been up to Scotland. They've relationships. Our chair has met the CEO quite recently, and so I think we're seeing the right noises around what direction they want to go in. There was some funding announced last week. Again, we didn't get the share of it that we wanted to, but the direction of travel was more towards our strengths, more towards kind of the innovation that we want to see. So I think there's some green shoots there. We can always do more. We can always do better by working more collaboratively with these bodies.
If you're saying already just missed out on funding effectively, but they're making the right noises, so you know, is there a clear plan to change that's going to actually help SMEs and help that expertise in Scotland access funding?
Yeah, so I think one of the things is getting, as was the previous witnesses were saying, getting the industry together to engage directly and be able to articulate that. The call or the fund, I think, flushed out some really good prospects, some really good projects in Scotland, and we've now got those as examples that we can take to the Space Agency and say, when are you going to open up another funding round? Because these would be fantastic things to add to the Scottish ecosystem, the UK's ecosystem. So I think that gives us some ammunition to be able to have those really robust conversations, and gives us some more concrete projects that we can work with the Scottish SMEs on to see how we could bring them to life through other means as well.
Is there a time frame in this? I mean, you know, is it just green shoots and optimism, or is there a time frame where actually see?
Fund only came out last week. The decision on the funding only came out last week, so we're kind of digesting it still. So we haven't kind of set a clear time frame or got a commitment for when another tranche of funding is imminent yet.
There really is still quite a lot of unknowns in terms of future funding, how that procurement's going to work then. Right, okay.
Okay, thanks, Alan. David Duguid.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of discussion from this session and the previous panel as well about how, I think Mr Aitken, you just said a moment ago about how Scotland's offer with more smaller SMEs provides some more flexibility and agility that you might not get from larger companies. And we also heard from Clyde Space and Spire about how being some of the smaller companies feels like you get squeezed out of some of the bigger funding decisions or some of the bigger contracts. Is that a fair summation of what's been discussed so far?
Yeah, I think those points were made by the previous speakers. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, with the Scottish Government, and there was a lot of discussion as well about defence contracts and defence funding, and with the Scottish Government choosing not to be part of what is otherwise UK-wide Public Procurement Act that was passed last year, does that, in your opinion, or in either of your opinions, cause a barrier to possibly being closer to public procurement spending, including defence, for the space sector in Scotland?
That's not been raised by industry with me, so I haven't got kind of specific examples where that's been that's been a barrier to date. No.
Mr. Fraser, any comment on that?
Likewise, haven't had that feedback.
And the other question, it's a question I often ask during this inquiry about this whole idea of having an end-to-end industry in Scotland. Does that, or could that potentially cause an issue with keeping the industry maybe perhaps too small, or smaller than it otherwise could be if it was more seen more as a holistic part of a larger UK-wide industry or part of a larger EU-wide industry, or even bigger? Do we run the risk of focusing on this end-to-end strategy of somehow contracting or compressing the potential of the Scottish space sector? Either of you?
I think it's a really good strategic challenge that we've looked at a bit of focusing on end-to-end. Does it mean that you don't specialise enough in individual aspects of that to be super competitive? We think that the end-to-end gives us that competitive edge, but it is really important when we're talking about launch that it's not seen as the be-all and end-all. Launches are fantastic, but they're a way of learning. And so I do see that there's risks for us in pursuing that end-to-end solution, because as we've seen recently, launches don't always have successful outcomes. And so I think the more we can do, and I think you were saying this earlier about kind of educating folks so that people understand there's still huge amounts of learning, and the best companies in the world who do this do have a lot of failures and learn a lot from those failures, and that's part of the process. I think that's really critical as we pursue end-to-end. And end-to-end is fantastic, but actually some of the data side of it, I do think will be as much the jewel in our crown as well. So sort of Edinburgh's strength in data analytics, I think we will see real value from that as much as the eye-catching value from launch. So I'd like them both, but I don't think there's a problem with focusing on end-to-end, as long as we make sure people are understanding that it's not always it's not
just end-to-end, it's
exactly
being part of the bigger picture as well. Mr. Fraser, anything to add to that? Okay. So going back to SDI, Scottish Development International, how does Scottish Development International, working with the UK government, identify gaps in either the UK or the Scottish capability that should be benefiting or could be benefiting from more inward investment?
We're very data driven on this, sector by sector. We work closely with DBT and with the Office for Investment as well, OFI more recently, as they've come into to being. There's normally a supply chain analysis and then a process by which we qualify those leads. So we think that there's an opportunity, we think there's a gap in our supply chain, we think it's going to be hard to grow that domestically in the timeframes that we need, and then we go and work in market with that company to make sure our desk-based research is appropriate and accurate, and then we work out if there's a strategic fit between us and the company, and then we take them through a process by which we try and land them in Scotland to the benefit of the Scottish economy.
And how do you actually work with the Department for Business and Trade in terms of not just having that one-to-one relationship with potential inward investors, but actually in the process of coming up with trade agreements or memorandums of understanding? For example, there was a DBT memorandum of understanding recently with Florida. I would imagine that would spike a lot of interest in the space industry in Scotland. So how does SDI work with DBT when those discussions are actually taking place?
So in market, there's a lot of very close working. The majority of my in-field staff are based inside the embassies. So they sit right next to the DBT guys, and they can talk it through. I engage very regularly with the director in DBT, who's responsible for engaging across the nations in a number of sectors. We have an executive forum by which we engage with the Directors General across DBT on a regular basis. And a lot of that work, for instance, the most recent one looked at both what are the propositions we're putting out there, but also how we're monitoring and evaluating our performance and making sure that we're kind of sharing lessons learned and sharing what we think the upcoming targets should be. And some of it is a real science and some of it is a bit of an art to work out what are the growing trends in the economy that you're going to go after. So where are you going to be really proactive and space for us has been a target area for the last wee while.
Mr. Fraser, I see you fidgeting there. Were you wanting to come in?
No,
you're just fidgeting.
You're just fidgeting.
Okay, sorry to stick to the SDI side of things, but maybe this next question could be something, Mr. Fraser, you might want to come in on, is how important is it to measure in terms of when you're looking at the value of an inward investment or potentially putting conditions on future investments, how important is it, and this was touched on in the previous session, the creation of new jobs and the numbers of new jobs being created versus, I think, what Mr. Gomes referred to as more sustainable, longer-term growth, or should we be looking at both those things?
100% both of those things. So when we're landing an investment, we go through a rigorous, particularly if we're supporting the company financially, we go through a really rigorous process. It's a 5-case business model that has an economic appraisal in it that evaluates what the impact of that partner is going to be. And then we tend to work with inward investors on the long term. So we want a long-term partnership where they grow and scale their opportunity, their investment, and double down. So it definitely isn't a kind of a one and done type relationship. As part of that, also we do look at displacement. So there's part of the economic appraisal, we consider the economic displacement that would occur as a result of that investment and the overall GPA. So the impact on the Scottish economy that we think that would have, and we have a good kind of bit of dead weight in there as well to account for optimism bias and those other things that some of the previous witnesses were talking about. But there is inward investors pay higher wages. And so there is a way that the inward investors drive up productivity, drive up the performance of the Scottish economy, but that is does sometimes create some friction that you heard about.
And Mr. Fraser, any last words?
Yeah, just on that, I think the other thing is the spillover benefit, so the opportunity to engage with the Scottish supply chain for a new inward investor coming, that would be something of an opportunity, not regionally and nationally as well.
Okay, thank you very much. No more questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for coming to see us today. As you're aware, the committee visited Glasgow, and we saw some absolutely outstanding examples of how the Scottish space sector is working. But the impression I went away with was, these companies could only really succeed and continue to grow and thrive if they were supported in the right way within the international community. They were operating in a truly global environment. So with that in mind, what do you see as being the main opportunities for Scottish space companies to access international markets? If we start with you, Mr. Fraser.
That's our trade supporters.
Okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, so there are definite target markets that we want to support companies into, and I think one of the interesting things for us is that also some companies and some partners don't realise the capabilities of space-enabled data, and so there is a kind of new series of markets and sectors that we can open up. There are some really interesting partnerships developing from Australia to closer to home to Europe, where we've got opportunities for our companies to export their products and services. Really, that data service, that they're in essence, even a lot of the manufacturing companies are ultimately space data companies, and what they're really commercializing is that space data. And what's great about that is it's replicable. So if you can do it to demonstrate what's happening to crops in Scotland, you can then do that to demonstrate what's happening to food security and crops all over the world. So hopefully it's a replicable model if we can get that working domestically to take globally. But you don't have to start domestically. Some of them are global by birth and are doing things in different markets they're not doing at home.
I recognise a lot of the value that you do. I mean, you do some really important work. So, please don't think that the next sort of series of questions anyway sort of taken away from that. I'm just trying to sort of probe something. So how do you? I mean, you mentioned you're a small team. So how do you make sure that you're utilising a small team, that you're being stretched in a whole? I mean, you've got huge demands on you. Everyone wants a piece of what you've got to offer. So how do you make sure that you're giving those Scottish space companies the best possible service? And where I'm actually going with this is,
So how do you link in to DBT and the embassy network? So how does that all sort of fit together?
So the first portion of that question is around prioritisation. So we have to make all sorts of unpleasant prioritisation decisions day in, day out, and I would love to do even more with the space sector, but we have to cut our cloth as to how much we can support. Given that we have prioritised, we've tried to find time to prioritise it and carve out budget lines and experts who can work alongside the sector, build their trust, be at those trade events and trade shows so that they know them and they trust them and have those relationships. So we prioritise, but space has definitely been within our priorities. In terms of how it works with DBT, on space it works really well. So there's some really nice examples in the last few weeks of DBT bringing delegations, for instance, to Northern Ireland and then saying, while they're in Northern Ireland, we can bring them over, it's not far, we can nip them over to Scotland. Could you put together a programme though, because you'll know the Scottish strengths better than we will, and of course we can. So I think there's some really good joined up examples of working. It helps that in a way the DB team, space team is quite small again, and so they passed my first name test. So do you know who you call in DBT? Yes, it's X, and I think that's positive. As I said, in the embassies overseas, we're on the FCDO platform, apart from in the US. So in other countries, there's close working by the fact that Chief by Jan.
And so with that in mind, how would you work into His Majesty's Trade Commissioners who would set the strategy for those regional markets? So, for example, for Latin America, take that. And I ask that just to be transparent. I'm one of the Prime Minister's trade envoys, covered Chile, Peru, Colombia and Argentina. Two of those markets, there has been in the past some satellite activity involving Scottish, or potentially some interest in Scottish companies. So how would you make sure that the work that you were doing is feeding into the work that the Trade Commissioner is doing, so that everyone's aligned and that you're on that strategy? How do you achieve that?
So there's some really exciting opportunities in Latin America in terms of deforestation, particularly in what you can do in terms of data science to analyse that. And there'll be some big opportunities, I think, in green finance in particular around, this isn't greenwashing. We can evidence that this coffee was produced sustainably because look at the satellite data, so I think that's really positive. I don't have anyone on that continent, on the sort of South American continent. I've got someone in Mexico, but nothing below that. And so it's vital that I work with the Trade Commissioner and the Deputy Trade Commissioner, so both in Sao Paulo and up in Mexico. We've got good relationships with them.
So just stop you there. So are you able to say to them, look, these are our priorities, this is what really matters for Scotland, we want to make sure that we're all aligned and that within your space strategy piece, this is the bit that we think we can deliver? Are you able to have that conversation, and do you feel that then gets built into a plan that you're able to all work together on?
We can definitely have that conversation. That's really easy, and we've done that to date. So they've come out, they phone us up and say, we're bringing some companies back to the UK on a roadshow. Which are the areas that you want us to target? How can you support them? What are the assets that you want to showcase in Scotland, and vice versa?
Okay. And the next bit, and this is maybe for you, but it's also maybe for Mr. Fraser. I can see, where the value would add is around that foreign direct investment. Identifying potential locations, partners. Holding their hand and introducing them to what Scotland has to offer. How often would you be asked that question by DBT, or do you find that DBT might go and do its own thing without getting you engaged at, throughout that journey?
So there's a Global Investment Summit today, and I'm not invited to that by our partners. So that's potentially an example where it hasn't worked perfectly. But I do think there are a lot of examples where it does still work, and it does work well. The UK has moved towards a value metric in terms of its FDI, so it's looking at sort of obviously scale of project rather than the number of projects. There is meant to be a referral mechanism by which things get funneled into us. I think at the moment it works maybe in spite of the systems and processes rather than because of the systems processes, because it's actually a smallish world and we know each other. So they will phone us up and say, are you engaging with X, Y and Z investor? Or we do likewise. And often it's really important for the investor to have each line of public authority lined up. So they want to know the local authorities on board, they want to know the Scottish Government on board, they want to know the UK government's on board. So we have to be able to provide as an account team that kind of one-stop thing where it's like you deal with me and my team, but we bring in the whole of the team that's going to land you here, and that's a concierge service.
Yep.
Doesn't always work, but is always the model that we're desperately trying to pursue, because that's what matters.
I think that bit works. That works well.
That works well, but it's based on relationships really at the moment, rather than a slick process or system that operates between institutions.
Mr. Fraser?
No, that kind of area is all via Reuben's side, yeah.
If there's any consolation, I've not been invited to the Global Investing Summer either, and as I said, I'm on the Prime Minister's Trade Envoys. But just to finish up, one of the things we've had is a lot of evidence to say that the focus in Scotland's established strength in small satellites. Are there other sectors where you think Scotland has got the ability to be world leading? And is there any learnings that you can pull out from your work you've done on satellites in order to help those sectors to develop?
I'd obviously rather be here, Chair, than at any sort of dinner elsewhere.
Leave terms enough.
So I think there are some interesting parallels potentially. The thing that sprang to mind for me is quantum. So space isn't really a sector. There's all sorts of different sectors that operate within it, and you see a similar thing in quantum. So it's kind of unifying purpose is quantum, and it's quite difficult to understand, and there's lots of very clever people operating in that sector, but it's not a sort of traditional business sector. And so I think there are some opportunities for us to learn lessons of how do we create industries and sort of specialisms in that sort of, for instance, in that sector, in the same way that we've tried to do with space. And some of my colleagues who were in the business 10, 15 years ago sort of say when they began to talk about space and the opportunity that this was going to be for Scotland 10, 15 years ago, there was a wry smile and people didn't really take them seriously. And now they're delighted and so I think it's making sure that we are really scale up innovation and to drive that forward. So it's being alive to that.
Thank you. Just one last thing from me when we're talking about the international opportunities for the space sector in Scotland. Is there any particular communication strategy that SDI uses when it is trying to reach a foreign marketplace and particular individuals?
Yeah, so we tend to do quite targeted campaigns based on whether we're targeting a specific CEO of a company that we want to make an introduction to, or whether we're doing something a bit more generic in marketing in terms of Think Scotland, Think Space. We've got, I think, a good story map. I could send it to the committee after this.
Do that just to we get some sort of sense just about how you do promote and what sort of strategy you use. Would you describe it as being successful?
I think so. So there's the significant investment. Most significant investment last year was in the space FDI project. So that's a huge opportunity. So that has borne fruit, and we're in discussions with some other serious players who are looking to Scotland now and who have begun to be attracted by the fact that their peers or their competitors are there, and so I think it is successful. I'd be
also
delighted to share
because we will have end-to-end capability. That's surely important too as an international destination. Great. Well, thank you.
He's ready.
But I know you'd much rather be here, Mr. Aitken, than any other place that might be of equal importance or excitement. But both of you, thank you ever so much for. And I think you're going to send us something through. I can't even remember what it was, but I'm sure the clerks will send you a note.
On the 3%.
About 3%.
Yeah, the 3% thing. That's exactly it. So that would be really helpful if we could get that. And anything else that you feel you could usefully contribute, of course, we're always here to hear anything further you've got to contribute to this inquiry. But for today, order. Thank you.